Welcome to Season 4 of She Ventures. I am your host, Doria Lavanino. She Ventures is a podcast about women who are pivoting in their lives and careers. We live in a world where women of color founders raise 0.5% of all venture capital in 2020, and women overall a paltry 2.2%. This podcast is about elevating women's voices. Our new website, sheventurespodcast.com, provides resources, actionable tips, mentorship, and community. We do not subscribe to the idea that there is a dearth of fundable ideas from women. There is no pipeline problem. There may be a visibility problem, and that is what we are here to fix together. Let's talk about the reality of women, money, entrepreneurship, and work-life balance on this season of She Ventures. This woman knows about business exits. She's held C-suite financial or operational positions in a few companies that were acquired. In 2018, she pivoted to entrepreneurship with her startup Compt, an award-winning HR technology company focused on retaining talent through additional benefits and perks. In the midst of a pandemic, she raised $1.5 million through Harlem Partners. And as I mention in every podcast, though not often in my intro, women tech founders who have successfully raised capital are 2.2%, and women of color are 0.05%. So very few women are able to do what Amy has done. She is here to speak to us about her pivot, and we're going to also ask her some questions about acquisitions and her past life. Amy Spurling, welcome to She Ventures.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you having me.
I'm excited because it's not often that I speak to someone with such a deep foundational knowledge of M&A, mergers and acquisitions, acquiring companies, and you've spent more than 20 years in leadership roles at venture-backed companies, and they ranged from early startup phase, right, through high growth phase, and then ultimately some of them were exits. What I was curious about, being that you have that vantage point, is what stage of a business do you enjoy the most and why?
It was interesting. A lot of my companies, they ranged in size. Some of them were as small as 10 people when I joined them. I think the biggest one I joined was 100, but that one grew over the course of 6 years to be 3,500 people. And what I found was that, one, I loved transactions. I loved going through as a CFO and doing funding rounds. I liked doing M&A. Like there's something very satisfying about doing transactions. But the day-to-day, when you're actually working in a business, to me stops being fun when you get over a couple hundred people, because you don't actually know even the names of everyone at that point. Like I think the statistic is you can know up to 250 and that's about it. And that's when it stopped being fun for me, because it is so much about the people that I'm working with. So I prefer the smaller, earlier stage. I think that you get to know people a lot better and figure out what makes them tick, and is part of the enjoyable day-to-day. So I really enjoyed the early side.
Would you say that there's an agility that people have when they're in an earlier stage company versus the largest company that I worked for was in media, was like Hearst or Condé Nast, and thousands of people. And I call it the velvet coffin because I felt like I was very well paid, but I wasn't learning anything anymore. And I just felt kind of like a cog in the wheel.
I think I've been fortunate where I wouldn't say any of my companies I felt like a cog, because they were all still on their growth trajectory. And I've specifically kind of avoided, like, I mean, you can see in my background, I haven't spent any time at having a job in a big, stable, ongoing kind of brand name company. They've all been growth companies. They've all been tech companies. So they were all pretty agile. and very dynamic internally because they were still figuring stuff out. So that is part of what I like personally, because I don't think I could do the cog thing either. Like, that's just not my personality.
So that's your sweet spot. I get it. And another thing that I read about you is that you closed 12 rounds of debt equity financing. So for our listeners, if you could just explain what that exactly means, because it was more than $200 million that you essentially were not responsible for, but were transacting, right? Can you kind of just, like, on a very high level, walk us through how these deals are structured and what you find to be so exhilarating about the process?
Sure. A lot of it was venture funding that was closed. So working closely with the CEO in those prior companies and then doing it myself in my own company now. It's figuring out which investors are going to be the right investors for your company who get your vision and believe in what you're doing and want to back you. So it's very much a sales process from that perspective, but finding that right partner, because the right partners make all the difference for a company's ability to scale and grow. It's not just about the cash. It's making sure you've got the right people around the table. So it's very much an interview process both ways, and then finding those right folks to be part of your vision and your team going forward. The transaction part is, I mean, it's literally once you find the right partner, it's diligence checklists, and there's reams and reams and reams of virtual paper that need to go back and forth as they're vetting and kind of looking at the business and all of that. That stuff I actually find to be very fun, which is a little, I know it's a little sick. It's a little sick. But I like my good checklist. So that, like, I take incredible pride in my diligence rooms, even now where I'm like, you know what, I know this is going to look really, really good. So doing that, that part is fun for me. But ultimately it's the end goal of making sure that you're supporting the business and making sure that it can grow in the way that it needs to. So whether that was, sometimes it was debt, sometimes it was equity, sometimes it was strategic partnerships, but figuring out, all right, how do we make sure that this business keeps growing? And that was part of the fun as well.
I didn't think about that, but I would imagine that would be challenging. And back to what you were saying earlier about finding the right investor for your business, that is incredibly difficult when, or maybe I'm making it so, I don't know, but I'm just thinking about most of the women that I've spoken to, right, who may not have the background that you do in finance. And so selling their vision is challenging. And I wondered how you perceive yourself as a woman in a very male dominated industry. How has that gone for you?
It kind of shifted over to be CEO of my own company. I mean, I do have a background in this. So I figured I have a leg up. This will be a lot easier for me. Obviously, I know the stats. I know how hard it is for women to raise. And honestly, sometimes you just got to take the check. Like, that's the reality. A female founder doesn't necessarily have the luxury of saying, I would like to speak to, these 10 investors and figure out which one is the most amazing partner for me. That's a dream world. And that's not always possible. But where you do have a choice, it's making sure that you vet as much as you can, or at least understand where you can or can't. Like, if you're pulling in money from somebody that is maybe not your first choice, understanding kind of the parameters and the risk that you're taking there so that you can manage it. So it may not be your ideal partner, but understanding how to work with them, because everybody's bringing something to the table. What I found for myself, though, was that it really didn't matter that I knew the industry. It was hard. Like, early on, it was very, very hard, very hard. It wasn't easier for me, I don't think, especially in the early stages, than any of the other female founders I talked to. I'm like, all right, it literally doesn't matter how much I know. That's almost irrelevant. It is what it is out there. Now, I have been able to raise. Most of the female founders I know have been able to raise. And so we're part of that, I guess, anomaly, because it's 2% of founders, female founders, are able to raise. And I know a lot of female founders who have raised. So we're clearly sitting in some cross section that is getting some of that money. So obviously I have had some help in that area and some privilege in that area, but it was a little bit of a shock to me early on, where I was like, oh, okay. Some of the investors I was speaking to, I had literally been in the room with them a year or two prior with a different founder because I was working with a CEO. And I saw the questions they asked those founders, and it was entirely different from what they were asking me. And these were people where I know them. I know what they were asking those founders. And I was like, interesting. I was like, I wasn't taking it personally. It was more of a social experiment where I'm like, all right, I have much to learn here. That was interesting.
That reminds me a lot. I'm probably sure that you are familiar with Dana Kantz's work, where she looked at a TechCrunch conference with male and female venture capitalists and male and female people who pitched, and found that women were more often asked questions that would require kind of a more defensive answer. And I don't remember the exact terminology.
It's around the risks. They ask us about our risk rather than about the vision.
Yes, and the rewards. Right,
Exactly.
2018, let's fast forward to there. How did you come up with the idea for Compt?
So it was something that I'd been chewing on for a few years in 2 or 3 of my prior companies. So I've been part of 6 companies prior to this over the course of my career. Some of them were very short, go into a transaction. Some of them were a little bit longer. But I saw where kind of sitting in that front row seat where you're managing finance, you're managing HR, you're seeing what candidates and employees are expecting around compensation. And all of the scale within a company is around employees. Like if you don't have employees, you're not going to scale, like end of story. Like no matter how amazing your software is, there has to be people who are running it and making sure it works. I saw how this was changing. Employee perks became a very big thing during the course of my career. They became a massive mess for the finance and HR team. So I wasn't actually planning on starting a company. I was sitting there going, all right, somebody please build this thing. Here's the software I want. I talked to lots of different engineers and other companies. I even was an advisor to a company that was kind of approaching that from an angle. And I was like, do this. And then they ended up pivoting and doing something different. I was like, I just need somebody to build this piece of software. Come on. And then I turned 40 and was like, what the heck am I waiting for? All of my prior founders had been first-time founders. Most of them had been under the age of, actually, I think maybe all of them were under the age of 40. I was like, I know what I'm doing. Like, this is not like I've got a lot of experience here. What am I waiting for? This is something that I don't know how I'm going to build another company for someone else or myself without this software existing. So I'm going to go do it. And so I decided, because I could see how much of a pain point this was in the market. I had talked to lots of other CFOs and other HR leaders, and I was obviously speaking to employees. This just needs to be solved. Like I have to do this. And so I know how to build a company. I know how to raise money. I know how to kind of do this. Let's go and do this because I need this piece of software to exist. So decided to start it.
That is incredible. And tell listeners what it is, what Compt is.
Compt is employee perk management software that helps companies build, manage, kind of design employee perk stipends. The goal here is really to get to that employee engagement factor. If you're going to have employee perks and your kind of compensation stack, you need people using them. Otherwise, it's not good for attracting or retaining talent. The problem is that traditional employee perks, so even the really good stuff, the student loan repayment or the childcare, the fertility benefits, if you're lucky, less than 5% of the team is using it. Like that's a high watermark.
That's incredible.
Is 5%.
Why do you think that is?
It's just think fertility benefits. Not only do you need to be in that stage of life, you need to be having fertility issues, and you need to be wanting to use that specific platform. That is a very small number within a company. Student loan repayment. You have to have student loans in your name, be willing to refinance with the bank that is being offered. And it's a lot of hoops to jump through. Most people are just like, to heck with it. I don't care. So, and then you distribute everybody across the country and the globe. And now you've got vendors that aren't even relevant in some markets because nobody has access to them. Every person wants to do something different, but you can't do that with a vendor marketplace. It's just not possible. So I was like, there's got to be a way to get every employee to do something different, but to do that in a way where companies can build a sandbox, say, hey, we want to support wellness or family or professional development or whatever the thing is. So they have a little bit of a guardrail and do this in a tax compliant way because none of the stuff out there was being taxed correctly. And that is a nightmare for CFOs. And so it's like, all right, we're either manually tracking this or we're not offering it. And neither of those are good options.
That is interesting. And what I'm wondering is more from the employee standpoint, or it's actually small business standpoint. If I am a very small business, say 2 or 3 people, am I able to use Compt, or is it more for larger companies?
You can. What I would say though is that there's a way to jerry rig this. I wouldn't want you to pay for software if you have 2 or 3 people. It's easier to just do it for free on a spreadsheet. You don't need to pay for software. When you start hitting 20, 25 people is where administratively trying to track stipends is just, it's worth it to spend money on that. Before that, to just be financially responsible, you don't want to spend several $100s a month for a piece of software to manage it for a couple people because it's small enough you can manage that.
The novelty is not necessarily in the fact that you're offering perks. It's the added benefit for CFOs that you, having been a CFO yourself and seeing this as a pain point, know exactly how they need to see this appear on their spreadsheets or whatnot.
It's both, because the CEO, you got to solve for the HR and finance piece of the puzzle. Otherwise, nobody's going to buy your software because they don't want their lives to be more painful. It's the two least staffed teams in an entire company is finance and HR. They just don't get the headcount that engineering or sales gets. So you can't make their lives more miserable. That's part of it. But the other piece is you have to show that employees will use this. So to give you an example, if normal employee perks, maybe 5% of the team is using them. On Compt, we see that 90+% of employees are using their stipends. So very high utilization. That's important. You need employees using this because otherwise it's not relevant for the organization. If I saw one of our customers where nobody was using it, I would approach them and be like, why bother paying for this software? You just shouldn't, because it's not the right strategy for your company. We don't see that. We do see the lowest utilization on our platform is 75%, but average is 90.
Why do you think that is?
It's the personalization. As an employee, you're given a stipend that's say, $100 a quarter to spend on wellness. You can spend that wherever you want. You can spend that in your normal daily life, whether it's, you could do it for a gym if you wanted, but if you're not a gym person, you want a mental health app, or you want healthy groceries, or you want running shoes, or you want a personal trainer. Do what matters to you. It's your life, your journey, your health. The company's just going to support it. So what's fascinating, we went and looked at 8,700 of our employee users on the platform last year and said, all right, 8,700 people, 12 months, how many different unique vendors could they possibly use? Because that's what personalization looks like when you're getting 90+% utilization. Guess how many different vendors they used during that time period?
I'm going to have to guess it's a large number, or you wouldn't be asking me. I don't know. Let me think. 500?
27,000.
Oh, my goodness.
So on average, every single person was using 3 unique vendors. That's what personalization looks like. Everyone wants to do something different. And you can enable that without crushing a finance and HR team by simply moving to stipends. So you can make everybody happy.
That's really interesting. And I don't think I completely actually understood that the freedom was with the employee. I thought that the company, maybe you guys surveyed the employees in the company, but it's actually just that the end user, the employee, will receive a certain amount of money and can use it for various benefits. That makes sense, right? In his or her life.
Exactly. So it's not there's no gym button, there's no yoga button by design. There's health and wellness, which a lot of companies will offer to their team. But the employee gets to determine what that means. The company builds the sandbox, and then the employee determines what happens in that sandbox. So there's still some guardrails and some controls, and companies can align this with their culture. But at the same time, it's giving a lot of flexibility to the individual employees.
I was curious what the most popular, is there a most popular benefit that people have on your platform?
Yeah, from a category perspective, health and wellness is definitely the most popular from a company's perspective because they want to support whether it's physical, mental, emotional, financial wellness for their team. Wellness is definitely, I would say, the top one. But within a stipend, you can have multiple categories, which is the beauty of it. So you can create this little kind of bundle for teams. So we do see a lot of remote work stipends now. That may have a cell phone category, an internet category, a remote work setup so you can get desk chair, whatever. It may also have health and wellness in it because people who are working from home are more likely to just stay in their house, stay at their desk. And so they actually need to be moving even more than the folks who were commuting to an office, because at least you were getting a little movement there.
Exactly.
So we'll see things like that. So that's a pretty common stipend. And then wellness is definitely common as well. And a wellness stipend may have the health and wellness category, but it may also have the family category. If your family's not healthy and happy, neither are you. It may have student loan repayment because your financial wellness is part of your wellness. It may have pets because maybe you have a pet as an emotional support animal, and that's part of your mental health. So there's all kinds of things that companies kind of, as they think broadly about what wellness means, may include. And that just means that employees can follow their own journey. And maybe one month you buy running shoes, but the next month you get pet insurance or you adopt a kitten. And then the next month you want to get a babysitter so you can have a night out away from your children. It allows you to follow your own path.
Absolutely. And have that flexibility. I can see why that's very attractive. How has attraction been since you started and you got funded in 2020 from then until now, being also that there was a pandemic in all of that?
From a customer perspective or an employee perspective?
From a customer perspective.
I mean, we grew almost 500% last year, almost 400% the year before. The move for companies to fully remote, this was already a problem before the pandemic. Employees were demanding, like the most common thing I heard as a CFO was, I don't want that. Why can't I have something else? Because it's the individual employee's compensation and they weren't getting access to it. COVID and the pandemic really laid bare the fact that individual employee perks is a very broken approach. And so a lot of companies started moving towards stipends, which is where we have grown incredibly over the last couple of years. So it's been a tailwind for us.
Oh, that's so exciting. And to be clear, you offer perks, but it is not that you offer healthcare and
Correct.
All of that.
Yeah, there's no health insurance, no dental, no life insurance, none of that stuff. It's more of the everything else, right? So it's the family, pets, wellness, student loan repayment, professional development, charitable giving, like all that type of stuff.
The stuff that matters, the stuff that makes us human. How does Compt make money?
It's a SaaS subscription software service. So companies pay an annual fee for the platform and then they go on their merry way. We do it in a way that they have guaranteed pricing. So we want to support our customers in their growth. Instead of charging them for every single person they keep adding to the platform, they basically have guaranteed pricing for their contract.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's whether you have 500 or 2,000, it would be the same pricing for the term of your contract.
Correct. So it's based on how many employees when you start the contract, but as you grow during the contract, we're not coming back to you for more money.
But then presumably when a contract is renegotiated, that's going to come into play.
Yep, it will.
Would make sense.
Yep.
Now, you had mentioned before pitching as a female founder. It was difficult. Can you talk to listeners a little bit about like how many times did you have to pitch? What was difficult about it for you? You already spoke a little bit about the kinds of questions that you were getting. Is there anything else that you want to share or tips that you want to give women who may be considering?
I mean, I have a feeling this is one of those you block it out when you're done kind of situations.
Yeah, like childbirth.
There were definitely a lot of pitches, but to be fair, like in my prior companies, there were a lot of pitches as well. So I don't think that was really any different of the volume. The questions were definitely different, but when you find the right partners, it gets a lot easier. So I was really fortunate to be able to work with Harlem Capital partners in our seed round. They understood the business. They have been tremendous partners for the past couple of years. Slack Ventures as well came in on our seed round. And so working with them because they really understood the remote kind of space, obviously. Like that's Slack's entire ethos is understanding the remote world. We've been fortunate to have the right partners around the table that like as soon as you get those right partners, that makes a huge difference. I was fortunate enough to be introduced to an absolutely incredible angel who has been my biggest cheerleader and champion for the past few years. And so it's finding those people that really believe in what you do. It can be very, very difficult. I think every round gets a little easier. So I will say that the angel round was the hardest round of my entire career, not just because I was female, just because it's hard to, there's no website. Angels don't have websites the way VCs do that say, this is what I'm interested in. These are my criteria. Because then you know, do I measure up or do I not? Angels are people with money, and you need to go and get them to give you that money. And that is very, very difficult to do. So that was definitely a harder round. But to do that, I approached it a little differently. I wanted to have a balanced cap table. So I wanted to have it be a mix of men and women, making sure that there was at a minimum gender balance on my cap table, but also pulling in other perspectives as well. And to do that, I needed to allow folks to write smaller checks. So I leveraged AngelList to basically be the platform where I could put folks with smaller checks, because you don't want to have little checks on your cap table. It makes a big fat mess. But being able to put them all in that one syndicate was amazing, which means that I could get folks to write 2,500 or 5K checks and start learning how to angel invest. And I approached a lot of female businesswomen who had never angel invested. And I was like, look, I know your purse. I know that purse costs $7,000. Put off your fall purse and write a check. Like, start learning how to angel invest, because this is how we change the environment. And that worked very well. And hopefully I help make them some money so that they keep angel investing. Because I think until we change who is investing, we're not going to change the environment of who's getting funded.
I agree. That seems to be a big part of it. And also because I think there's a bit of, I don't want to say they're all white men, because they're not necessarily, but if it's a white man who's listening to your pitch, he's bringing his own experience to that pitch. And this has been, I think, an issue with femtech in particular. The femtech founders that I've spoken to anyway have found that oftentimes they're just not understood. Their product, their vision is not understood. How do you take that as an entrepreneur? I guess part of it is the challenge of, okay, well, even if your experience is totally different, I need to figure out a way to get you to understand why this is a big issue. I don't know. It's tricky.
I feel like it is changing. I do feel like there's starting to be more and more female founded unicorns. And I think that is changing the dynamic in the industry. I think also the investor slate is changing, and there's more of a recognition of that. I mean, we're a long ways from getting 50% of the funding that's out there, but I think that there's a lot of money out there, period. And so there's places to get some of it. We're still going to get, as female founders, less funding than our male counterparts, but more funding doesn't necessarily mean your business does better, is the other piece here. Just because you've raised $100 million does not mean your company is going to succeed. We had competitors early on that outraised us by 2 to 3 times. And they went out of business during COVID because they didn't have the right idea. They didn't have the right approach. So it's believing in what you're building and understanding your market intrinsically. And then just female founders, people of color, we tend to build more efficient businesses because we have less capital to play with. So we figure stuff out. So I think the tide is turning slowly, but it is turning, and that will change the environment as well.
As you're talking, I'm watching right now, I think it's on Netflix or Apple TV.
I can't remember. Dropout?
Yeah. And
yes.
I was like, wow. No, wait, the Dropout? No, I'm watching the WeWork.
Oh, okay. Yep.
And the way that they portray Adam Newman is really, if it's accurate, it's kind of shocking, the inequity of how some people with the gift of gab and charm and were able to pull off these. I mean, I guess in the end, although he did end up with a lot of money. I don't know.
Yeah, he made a lot of money. No one else did. Like, that's one of the dirty secrets of tech. And we're working to change that within this company. In most exits, the founder and the investors make money. If it's a decent exit, nobody else makes money. The early days of Facebook where, the janitor became a millionaire, that doesn't happen anymore. It just doesn't. It's much more likely to be the MailChimp scenario where the founders make billions and everybody else is like, what just happened here? That's far more common. I personally don't think that's fair. I couldn't build this company without my team. I'm not writing code. I'm not the marketing genius who is making sure that we've got leads coming in. And so we're doing it in a way where I want everybody to have a significant exit across the team. That's really important to me. We've got a really diverse team. We're 67% people of color, 50% female. If these folks all have significant exits, then at some point, then they're going to be able to turn around and build companies themselves. They're going to turn around and angel invest in companies. And that starts changing the environment. That is really important to me.
I love that. That made my day. You have raised a seed round. Are you going back to the market for a Series A, B? What are you up to?
TBD, cannot be announced yet.
Okay.
But yes, a Series A, but TBD on the announcement.
Okay. Coming soon, though.
Coming
maybe.
soon. Yes.
All right.
Announcement coming soon.
Very exciting. And then I just wanted to also ask you, because churn is such a cost for businesses, and I would imagine that really what went into the thinking also behind employee perks is that you want to reduce churn. And I was looking at a survey from the Society for Human Resource Management that was looking at how the need for benefits have changed due to COVID. And at that point, they were saying that these were the top five. It was employee options for telework. That was 78%. Telemedicine services, no surprise there, 43%. Leave to care for children, 40%. Again, elder care, 27%, and mental health services, 25%. So with that in mind, how do you see in 2022 the landscape of benefits evolving?
I think it just continues. Like, the beauty of stipends is you can do all of those things, with the exception, like, you need to have a company that understands the concept of flexibility. That's not a monetary thing. That's, if you're going to force everyone back to the office, flexibility is out the window. So I think there's that piece that I'd put in its own bucket. The rest of it is employees require choice. Like, it's, even if you are offering elder care services, one, not every employee needs that. Two, no matter what you offer, it's not going to apply even to all the employees who want that. And if your team is really distributed, it's nearly impossible to reach everyone. So it goes back to that personalization piece. Like, that is what I see being the driver for so many employees. Every single person's life is different and their needs are different. And that's where flexibility is huge, to be able to recognize that employees all have different things going on in their lives and have different needs at different times. There was a story on LinkedIn recently, one of like a blog post, where this woman was saying she's working from home. There was a snowstorm that hit. She had to go get her kid from daycare because daycare was going to close early. She shut down her computer. She went to the daycare, picked him up, came back, was back online within half hour, 45 minutes. She's like, if she had been required to work in an office and wasn't able to work from home, she would have been shutting down for the day, driving an hour to go pick up her kid at daycare, driving them then home. Like, she would have been out for multiple hours. Like, just the ability to be more productive in a way that also works for your life. It just doesn't make sense not to allow that. We've proven for 2 years, that more than 2 years now, that remote work can work. The companies that are putting the stake in the ground and requiring people to go back full time, I mean, they're going to really struggle to hire, and there's going to be a lot of turnover. And I think they are ultimately going to see a significant exodus from people who are caring for children. No, so whether that's like, regardless of which parent, it's just too hard. It's just too hard when there's so many other options of ways to do this, and companies who are willing to be flexible.
Exactly. And you are, right? Compt is 100% remote.
We're fully remote. We talked about it. I actually never planned on being fully remote. I was dead set against it when I started the company. The woman that started it with me, we had this conversation very specifically, and she's like, well, I might want to move to Austin. And I was like, look, maybe after a year, but when we're founding this, we got to be in the same room. Like, it's too hard. She ended up staying, which was amazing. And, for a period of time, and then she ultimately moved to Florida, which was perfectly fine at the time. But I didn't want to do that because you have to design for how you communicate. You have to design for how the team interacts, and you build a culture and all of that. COVID forced it to happen. And it was the best thing that could have happened, honestly, because I can hire across the country and get the best people for the job, regardless of where they're located, which makes it a lot easier to build the best people for the job come from all kinds of places. And that's hugely beneficial. It's also just looking at what we did before now is just, we kind of look at each other and like, what were we even thinking? Like we'd commute, whether I was walking in the city or somebody was taking a train in, 45 minutes each way, each day to go into an office where we'd sit shoulder to shoulder, be breathing on each other. Gross. Not like the place that we had didn't have great heat. And then you put on headphones so that it can be quiet and so you can get work done. Like,
Yeah.
How ridiculous is that? Like, what a waste of time when you can just work from home, like, and not have any of that.
It's so true. And, I've heard also the argument with founders, especially early stage, we're like, no, we have to have a whiteboard and be in the same room. But really, even that can be done.
I mean, that's all digital. There are so many digital whiteboards. You do not need a whiteboard. Like, I will say it is nice that we are able to get together occasionally. Now we actually have a team offsite in DC in a couple of weeks. And that's going to be really nice to get everyone together, because I do think it's really hard to read people even over Zoom, where you need to get the body language and the cues from them. And like, there's just something about being in person where you can get a vibe off of somebody in a way that you can't in Zoom. So I do think that's important, but I also don't think you need to be in an office every day to do that. I think it can be a fun once or twice a year thing where everybody gets together.
A lot of the women who listen to this podcast are solopreneurs or have one or two probably contractors or maybe employees working for them. What tips would you give to measure productivity? Because it can be very difficult if you're not with someone to know exactly what they're doing and how many hours they're logging. And if they even understood, there could be miscommunications that are unintentional.
That's a great question. And it's something that I think also changed with COVID. A lot of times for a lot of companies, productivity was measured in exactly what you mentioned, how many hours someone was working, or were they at the office, period. I think that's the wrong measure. And I think that's something that is a lot that's changed now. One of the things that we do is we work an OKR system at Compt. So it's, you define goals and they're very measurable, like numerical as much as possible. And it's basically like giving people the freedom to go and accomplish them. You're setting it with them, so you're not just kind of picking a number out of thin air. But instead of managing, is someone online or are they not, or what are they doing? Like you may have like different check-in points and whatever, but instead of doing the micromanagement and needing to see them to know that work's getting done, it's much more about, are you accomplishing your objectives? If you are, cool. Let me let you do it the way that works for you. And so it's measuring to an outcome instead of measuring to number of hours worked.
It's really interesting because I've heard so many different answers to this. I didn't even know that there's apparently a software that exists that can tell someone how often you're actually active on your computer. And
it's awful. A curse be put on the person who invented that. I don't know who that is, but honestly, I think it is one of the nastiest pieces of software out there. Like that is spyware on your employees. That is horrible. Like awful. It makes that actually upsets me that somebody built that where it's like either measuring keystrokes or the cameras that are just watching you.
The way the woman described it to me, and she was a big advocate for it, she said that if the computer is not used for a certain amount of time, I'm thinking, well, what if you go to walk your dog or something? Like, I don't know.
No, I am not an advocate for that at all. I think that is just, if you have to measure keystrokes by an employee to understand that they're doing anything, like I could be typing an email to my mother, you don't know what I'm actually doing. If that's how you're measuring productivity, you're measuring the wrong thing. Like that is, you've got the wrong people and you don't trust them. You have to build trust with your team and trust that they know what they're doing. And if they don't know what they're doing, that's on you as a leader. You need to set clear goals and expectations. That's on you.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And would you say that that's something that you do monthly, quarterly from a remote perspective?
The goal setting happens quarterly, but we do the reporting against it every Monday. One person from each, whether it's engineering or product or sales or whatever, sends an email to the whole team. We're a small team, so we can still send an email to everyone where it's like, this is what my goal is for the quarter. This is what was accomplished last week for this team. This is what's on deck this week, so that we know that things are progressing. But we don't need to sit in an hour-long meeting where we all update each other. You can scan that in a couple minutes. Once a month, we do an hour-long retro where we go a little bit deeper and kind of walk through like, all right, we're a third of the way through the quarter. How is this progressing? What are the blockers that we're seeing? Like, what do we need to change? Like, are there things that we need to adjust from what our goals were because something else big has come up? So we have that conversation, but it takes about an hour. And then once a quarter, it's 2 hours because it's a look back and then a look forward to the next goals. So trying to manage how much time we spend together and not having it be updating each other on things that we could really kind of learn through a quick email, but also making sure that the whole team is aligned and aware of what's going on across the company too.
I love that. And I think there's so much time that's wasted in meetings. But at the same time, to your point, you don't want the information to be siloed. And so it sounds like your solution is perfect, that everyone can be updated as needed.
Well, and it's perfect for this size and stage. That process has changed probably 10 times in 4 years and will continue to change and evolve. So as we grow, maybe the email to everyone doesn't work, but maybe that email needs to go just to the leadership team. And then you do the retro, and companies do all hands, at different cadences. So it'll continue to evolve. That's working for us right now, but it's also will break at some point and we'll have to do something different.
I think what you are doing is amazing, and I would love it if you could tell listeners where they can learn more about Compt.
They can learn about us on our website, so www.compt.io, or at Compt HQ on Twitter.
It sounds like there's going to be some sort of big news coming in the next couple of months. So we'll be looking out for that, and we'll share it with our listeners because we always like to do that with people who have appeared on our show. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
You've been listening to She Ventures. Like what you heard? You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to subscribe and sign up for our newsletter so you never miss a show.